Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Marcia McNutt. I'm the president of the National Academy of Sciences, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here. I think we probably set a new record for the most Ukrainians ever in this auditorium at the same time. So it's my pleasure today to welcome you to this conference, which is celebrating the U.S. and Ukraine partnerships in education and in science. There are so many dignitaries joining us today that I'm not going to take the full program up listing them all, but I want to offer a special warm welcome to the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska. You truly honor us with your presence here today, and I'm sure you can tell from the warm welcome you've received how much we're all inspired by your efforts every day on behalf of the people of Ukraine. So thank you so much. We're also grateful to Ambassador Oksana Makharova and the Ukrainian Embassy for allowing us to co-host this important event. Now, First Lady Zelenska has been a true champion for all of Ukraine's people, but especially for its children. The children have borne much of the brunt of the war, and I'm sure you were all sickened, as I was, to hear the news earlier this week that Ukraine's largest medical center for children in Kiev was severely damaged by a Russian missile attack. Our hearts go out to everyone who was affected. Ukraine has experienced so much suffering, and I know how hard this must be, especially for you, Madam First Lady, since you've been so involved in evacuating children so that they could get cancer treatment and ensuring that the Ukraine's children's hospitals have the equipment and the supplies they need to help the youngest in Ukraine. First Lady Zelenska's dedication to children began even before the war. She led efforts to ensure equal opportunity, including a world-class education for all of Ukraine's children. In addition, she has been a strong force for the preservation of Ukraine's language and culture, and for sharing that culture with those of us in the rest of the world. My academy and our partner academies around the world share her commitment to children's health, education, and well-being. It is so dependent on advances in science and knowledge, and therefore it makes sense for us to consider both education and science together at this gathering. It's no accident that when Russia first invaded Ukraine almost 2.5 years ago, the Russian military has especially targeted the scientific facilities, universities, schools, and the children. It's as though Russia wants to destroy Ukraine's future and its hope for the future. We know the distinguished contributions that these Ukrainian institutions have made to science, and we're committed with our fellow academies across Europe and in the West to rebuild Ukraine into its former glory. Since the early days of the war, we worked with science academies and especially some very generous philanthropic organizations to support Ukrainian researchers, both those who had to flee the country for Poland, for example, and those who remained inside Ukraine. We want to keep them connected to global scientists and make those connections that will help in the rebuilding process. As one material scientist we interviewed said recently, quote, "I just want to help my country." That sentiment we have heard over and over again. It keeps her and her colleagues going despite the many hardships and difficulties they face. Now, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences remains committed to ensuring that Ukrainian scientists and science establishments are prepared for the rebuilding after the war. Most recently, I guess it was about 3 months ago, there was a big gathering at the House of Ukraine, and I was joined by Ambassador Markarova and Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal and the U.S. State Department Special Representative for Ukraine's Recovery, Penny Pitzer, to announce our latest initiative, the Science and Innovation Fund for Ukraine. This is a multi-million-dollar fund aimed at positioning Ukraine's science and technology enterprise to be a major driver in Ukraine's sustained economic and national security. The pursuit of science is crucial, not only for Ukraine, but for all nations, because all of us want a better future for ourselves and our children. That's why research and education are truly global undertakings. They've long transcended national borders and even wars. This is why my academy is proud to stand strong with Ukraine. The First Lady will deliver her keynote address shortly, but first I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Allan, the 10th U.S. Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy, and she will share her remarks now. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. McNutt, for that gracious introduction and for hosting this beautiful gathering here today in this beautiful building. I'm so honored to be representing the U.S. State Department and the U.S. government. We are so pleased to be hosting the NATO summit here this week and to welcome so many friends, partners, and leaders, and to be able to discuss not just our security alliance, but to discuss the issues that are at the heart of the relationships between all of our people. Everything from combating disinformation to advancing our women, peace, and security agenda, indeed to advancing culture and education. So I'm deeply honored to be here today with First Lady Olena Zelenska, Deputy Foreign Minister Iryna Borovets, and I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to First Deputy Minister of Education and Science Yevhen Kudryavets, and Director General of the Ukrainian Institute, my friend Volodymyr Shevchenko. Thank you for being here, dear friends from so many educational, academic, cultural institutions. We are so grateful for the partnership of everyone here. And it's great to see so many colleagues from the U.S. government, especially my friend, U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink. All of your presence here today and continued leadership in education has been invaluable as we build a brighter and stronger future together. We gather here today to bear witness to the impacts of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and particularly to one of the most basic and essential human rights, and that is education. The United States reaffirms its unwavering commitment to stand with the Ukrainian people, not only because it is the right thing to do, but to ensure the education of future generations, Ukrainian and American alike. For me, from traveling to Ukraine for the first time in 2015, to some of the events I've attended over the past year, including a very powerful cultural heritage event last year during UNGA at the Ukrainian Institute of America, to more recently our film screening at the State Department for the Academy Award-winning and unforgettable documentary 20 Days in Mariupol, we have a renewed sense of pride for our joint efforts to preserve culture, to advance education, and to reaffirm my belief that cultural policy is security policy and education policy is security policy. So today's event is no different and is just another step in our partnership. I know we would all agree that education is both critical to safeguarding culture, to preserve the memory and the legacy of Ukraine's significant contributions to world heritage, and most importantly, to ensuring that Ukraine can flourish as an independent, vibrant democracy into the future. We have seen Russia's brutal attacks directly on Ukraine's education system, as was mentioned. The striking of printing presses to disrupt the production of Ukrainian textbooks, the bombing of schools and facilities, the forced displacement of students, not to mention the secondary setbacks in education for the number of service members that are on the front lines instead of in a classroom or in a laboratory. And so to counter some of those Russian attacks, I'm very proud to say that the United States will be funding the printing of more than 3 million textbooks of Ukrainian students to use in the coming year. This will ensure that Ukrainian students are taught from Ukrainian books about their own history, their own culture, their language, and their identity. We have also, from the U.S. State Department, significantly increased the number of Ukrainian Fulbright students since the start of the war, providing opportunities for them to study in the United States. This year, Ukrainian Fulbrighters are studying in fields like labor law, focusing on engaging veterans in the workforce, like architecture, learning about the preservation and reconstruction of historical buildings that were damaged or destroyed during the war, and in renewable energy, for example, looking to incorporate greener infrastructure and technology as Ukraine's energy infrastructure is rebuilt. These Fulbrighters will be equipped for the massive challenges of rebuilding their country, empowered by the unwavering support from the communities and academic partnerships forged by their time here. I know many of you are involved with not just Fulbright students, but other Ukrainian students studying in the United States and take very seriously our commitment to maintaining relations with them into the future. And I'm proud to say that under the Fulbright Foreign Language Teaching Assistant Program, we are also working with Ukrainian teachers of English to serve as teaching assistants on U.S. campuses for students studying Ukrainian. This critical exchange not only exposes American students to native speakers of Ukrainian, but also provides academic institutions with a unique perspective as they develop Ukrainian studies programs. A very critical part of this partnership and something that we're looking forward to hearing more about today from the panel. I want to tell you just a little bit more about the U.S. investments in Ukrainian education and the impacts of the students, participants, and programs. Last year, for example, a Ukrainian alumnus of the distinguished Humphrey Fellowship Program partnered with his host university, the University of Washington, to launch a free online course on Ukrainian history and culture. And this course is now accessible to more than 10 million users worldwide, teaching people about Ukraine's unique identity. Initiatives like this demonstrate the ripple effect of exchange alumni on their communities and what they go on to do around the world, and why we're so committed to investing in them. In addition, this year is the first time that we partnered with the Citadel, South Carolina's military college, to host students from Ukraine through our Global Undergraduate Scholarship Program. Thanks to Congress's approval of the Ukraine Reconstruction Engineering Fellowship, we are working with the Citadel to expand the placements for Ukrainians for next year in the fields of engineering, cybersecurity, and supply chain management, demonstrating our commitment to providing meaningful contributions to reconstruction needs through educational exchange. And finally, importantly, it must be said, the United States, through our embassy in Kyiv, has continued to support independent media in Ukraine as part of our broader educational efforts, helping to bolster the strength, resilience, and reach of the press, as well as amplify firsthand reporting and documentaries from the front lines of Russia's war on Ukraine and to combat Russian disinformation. In closing, I'll just say that as President Biden and Secretary Blinken have said many times, the United States will stand with the people of Ukraine for as long as it takes, supporting Ukraine's efforts to combat Russia's brutal attempts and disinformation campaigns to undermine Ukraine's history, identity, and culture. So Stronger Together could not be a more fitting affirmation of our continued work side by side with Ukrainian partners, with the resilient Ukrainian people, on educational and cultural programs and initiatives that will amplify and protect Ukrainian heritage and identity, a source of hope for all. And now I would very much like to welcome to the podium my friend, Deputy Foreign Minister Iryna Borovets, who I am proud to be working with to explore the ways the State Department can work with the Ukrainian government on public diplomacy programs and exchanges to further train, inspire, and empower the people of Ukraine as we look to build a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Allan, for such a kind introduction. Dear First Lady Olena Zelenska, dear President Marcia, McNutt, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, it is a great honor for me to represent and to open this conference on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. And I would like to start with the words of appreciation. Let me express my deepest appreciation to the Assistant Secretary in the Office of Career, Technical and Adult Education, Emmy Lloyd, Smithsonian Institute's Undersecretary for Education, Dr. Monique Schism, CEO of the Institute of American Education, Dr. Allan Goodman, President of American Council, Lisa Coate, our many colleagues in the Department's Bureau of Education and Culture, all the conference speakers and contributors for their invaluable efforts in supporting Ukraine's academia in the face of injustice and unimaginable challenges. Let me also commend the Embassy of Ukraine to the United States and personally thank to our Ambassador of Ukraine, Oksana Markarova, for taking a lead in organizing this important event. Since century, Russia has tried to erase Ukrainian cultural identity. However, it never was and it never will be successful. There are many reasons for that. And I would name only one, the most important one to my opinion. In Ukrainian language, there is a word voля. It is hard to translate precisely into the foreign languages. In English, it may mean liberty or freedom. But above all, it means aspiration of being free as the highest value for Ukrainian, and readiness to defend this value with our lives. Voля rooted deeply in our history, culture, and mentality. And therefore, Russia fights voля so desperately. And we cannot let Russia win this battle. Today's conference also aims to address this issue, and please remember this word, voля. Propaganda breeds on ignorance, and promotion of Ukrainian studies program will be the best way to counter Russian myth propaganda and weaponizing of history. 50 years ago, the Harvard University Research Institute became the first and for a long time the only academic center in the United States devoted to the study of Ukraine's history and culture, being in the forefront of debunking the many myths about Ukraine and its history. Many American universities followed suit, and we are deeply thankful to all academic institutions which established positions for teaching Ukrainian language, literature, culture, and history. We hope that this trend will continue. We are thankful to the Ukrainian World Congress and the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America for taking the lead in the fundraising and advocacy campaign to support this initiative. And today we are also taking the next step in announcing the creation of the Global Coalition of Ukrainian Studies. It will become a platform for dialogue and exchange of knowledge between students studying the past, present, and future of Ukraine. And we will multiply these initiatives across the globe. Many thanks to the US National Academy of Science for hosting our meeting in this beautiful building, and the conference partners, Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Institute, Presidential Fund for Education, Youth and Sport, and the Ukraine House DC Foundation for supporting this event. Now let me invite you to watch the video on the impact of Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine's academic institution. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our continued engagement and cooperation. Thank you very much.
For millions of our students, cheerful sounds of first bells turned into every day we see rockets and shells destroying not only the walls of schools, but also the dreams of children. Every day, the terrorist state commits new crimes against humanity. Over 3,500 institutions damaged. Specifically, 13% of our educational infrastructure has been affected. Between 35% and 69% of all education institutions in Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kherson, and Luhansk regions have been either damaged or destroyed. Students, teachers, and educators in territories beyond government control endure repression, forced militarization, deportations, and violations of rights and freedoms. Education faced occupation. Education institutions were forced to flee the cities and villages and relocate to safer areas. Most of the equipment from universities and schools remained in the occupied territories. 31 universities were relocated and resumed their operations in safer areas. By the end of 2022, 69.8 thousand university students were studying in these institutions. One of them is Mariupol State University, which now operates in Kyiv. Some universities have been relocated since 2014. For example, Vasyl Stus Donetsk National University currently operates in Vinnytsia. But there are heroes in this story, our educators. They teach in snow-covered buses, basements, and bomb shelters. Their resilience serves as a beacon of hope amidst the chaos of war. They resist. They dream. They believe in the future. They will shape together. Almost 7 million children will know the word war from childhood. Education in schools, universities, and kindergartens is constantly interrupted by air raid sirens, and the effects of war are felt even in relatively safe areas. But our story is about how we keep moving forward in the darkest times. It is about growth and the strategy of winners, which defines the direction of education until 2027. It is about innovation and the launch of the educational app Dream. It is about the success and victories of our students on an international platform and the recognition of Ukrainian educators as Teachers of the Year. It is about development. Despite everything, Ukraine is continuing its educational reforms. Development cannot be put on hold. By 2033, we need nearly $14 billion for recovery, but we're not waiting. Together with partners, we are already rebuilding schools, providing gadgets, constructing underground schools and shelters, and restoring children's access to education. Build Back Better means rebuilding to be better than before, a principle we adhere to in our restoration efforts. Amid the ruins, our students are dancing waltz. They are studying online to get into their dream universities. They continue to explore and acquire new professions. Examples of the resilience of our children and students symbolize our unwavering faith in the future. We are grateful to everyone who helps us write this story, a story about how education in Ukraine continues to thrive even in the darkest times. Together, we will prove that knowledge and the desire for development are stronger than any rockets.
And now it is my honor to welcome to the stage the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska.
Thank you. Dear President McNutt, dear Undersecretary of State Allan, distinguished guests, it is a great honor for me, seriously, to participate in today's significant conference. And I will start from that point. As you entered the reception hall, you could see the exhibitions which, better than any words, demonstrated the current state of Ukrainian science and education. You saw burned and half-burned books there. These are the last copies from the Kharkiv printing house. The other 50,000 copies were destroyed by a Russian missile. 7 printing workers lost their lives next to them. Ukrainians bought the books found in the ashes to support the families of victims. And we have brought some of them here because they illustrate better than any story how aggressor country treats Ukrainian culture. You will also see the exhibition postcards from Ukraine. Unfortunately, these are not the postcards sent from vacation. Each one shows photos of Ukrainian museums, memorials, libraries before and after the destruction by Russia. Meanwhile, the exhibition Science in Danger will tell the stories of Ukrainian scientists and scholars who have lost decades of hard-earned research because the Russian army destroyed their laboratories and universities, and in some cases took their lives. Hundreds of Ukrainian students and the future scientists have never received their diplomas because they have been killed. We have also brought these diplomas for the exhibition. Dear friends, in this war of annihilation and devastation led by Russia, the loss extends beyond human lives, though the most important thing is human life. The war also entails the setback of development in societal prospects. Each attack on schools, universities, and libraries not only causes destruction, but also sets back progress for years. During the first year of the invasion, we seriously considered whether to start the school year because it was too dangerous for children. Hundreds of schools had already been destroyed by the occupiers. However, we realized that we had to do everything we could to ensure that children received their education. This is necessary not only for their future, but also for our sustainable present. As a result, 2/3 of Ukrainian students have been studying remotely all these years. There are some of the youngest children who have never seen their classmates and teachers in person because they have never sat at a desk. That is why we are actively building bomb shelters in the schools so that children can study offline. Of course, the quality of such education is much better than online. And we have even launched the first underground school. Although this is nonsense in the 21st century, however, this is our reality. And we are grateful for every country, organization, and person who helps us to preserve development for children, including the United States Agency for International Development, which helped, as we said, print more than 3 million textbooks for Ukrainian students ahead of the school year. For ourselves, we have long decided that we cannot afford the luxury of waiting for victory to rebuild. So to truly win, first and foremost, in a civilization sense, we need to rebuild life now, faster than they destroy it. We want not only to preserve territory, but also to safeguard civilization, development, science, and culture within it. That is why the educational partnership between our countries is so important. And we are excited about the opportunity to build stronger bridges between Ukrainian schools, universities, and research laboratories and their partners in the United States. Unlike dictatorship, the free world is based on common humanistic values and multiplication of knowledge. That is why we cannot allow disinformation, distortion of history, and destruction of Ukrainian culture and science to prevail. This would mean the defeat of the free world. That's why when people ask me what else they can do to help Ukraine, besides the very much needed air defense systems, my answer is by spreading our culture and knowledge about us, about our science, our history, about the fact that we are not the part of Russia, as it claims. Instead, Russia has appropriated hundreds of Ukrainian cultural contributions for itself. Therefore, our current defense extends to the cultural front as well, against the colonizer and for the restoration of historical justice. That is why I'm so grateful when Ukrainian studies find a place in universities, libraries, and museums around the world. This knowledge is not just about knowing Ukrainian scholars or cultural figures. It is about understanding Ukraine, which means understanding the causes of Russian chauvinism and to understand the consequences of this chauvinism. Artists and writers were shot and names were appropriated. This has already happened in our history, and it should not happen again. As the First Lady of Ukraine, I'm trying to do my part by supporting, among other things, the Ukrainian Bookshelves initiative, within we have already donated 47,000 books about Ukraine to 40 university libraries around the world. During my last visit to the Washington, D.C., we donated 250 books to the Georgetown University Library, and we hope that one day a Ukrainian Studies Department will be launched there as well. We also launched, thank you. We also launched more than 80 Ukrainian language audio guides in monuments and museums in 44 countries. Here again, my gratitude goes to the Ukrainian museums in New York and Chicago, the Ukrainian Institute in New York, and the Ukrainian House in Washington, D.C. Thanks. I'm grateful for the outstanding efforts to promote Ukrainian culture in the United States. And 50 years ago, Harvard University's Ukrainian Research Institute became the first and for a long time, as we know, academic center in the United States to study history and culture of Ukraine. And for many years, it was the only one, but later, many American universities followed this tradition, opening Ukrainian courses and scholarships in Ukrainian studies. Thank you. I only wish to see Crimean Tatars studies among them, in honor of the people of Crimea who were enslaved by Russia and are currently facing repression there. The United States has become a unique hub of diversity and growth for various peoples and cultures. So I'm sure that these will be a matter of principle here. The best way to oppose occupations and annexations is to empower and support those affected by them through advocacy and development initiatives. Dear friends, Ukraine is grateful to everyone, scientists, universities, public figures, libraries, museums, governmental and non-governmental organizations who help educate Ukraine and raise awareness about Ukraine around the world. We are thankful to everyone who created Ukrainian studios, translated books, organized exhibitions, and sheltered our artists and scientists. Why is it worth pursuing Ukrainian studies here on the other side of the world? It is to understand better not only the diversity of the world, but also one's own culture. After all, Ukraine has made a great contribution here in the United States. For example, a century ago, the eminent Ukrainian aircraft designer Igor Sikorsky found refuge here from Bolsheviks, and he built dozens of helicopters and airplanes that set world records and were the first to cross the Atlantic. The greatness of the universe and the human mind was revealed to millions of readers by the son of Ukrainian immigrants, astronomer Carl Sagan. Lyubomir Romankiv made the creation of hard disk drivers a true revolution in recording information possible. He was born in 1931 in Zhovkva, near Lviv, Ukraine. worked and lived in the United States. Nobel Prize-winning economist Simon Kuznets, the author of GDP concept, received his education in Kharkiv. Today, this university city is under daily bombardment. Russia is devastating lecture halls and jeopardizing the future of aspiring scientific minds. You see how science and culture bring us closer together. They have already brought us closer, and I believe that they will indeed save the modern world. The spread of knowledge is victory over aggression, over destruction, over chaos. And I thank you for standing with us on the side of light. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam First Lady, for those very inspirational and very moving words, and for your continuing leadership as we attempt to ensure a much better future for Ukraine. Our second keynote speaker today is Halyna Hryn, and she's president of the Shevchenko Scientific Society. So please welcome.
First Lady Zelenska, Dr. McNutt, Deputy Minister Borovets, Undersecretary Allan, dear colleagues, dear friends. I want to say how moved I am by the fact that this is taking place, this conference dedicated to Ukrainian studies in the United States, in North America. And I want to thank specifically Olena Zelenska for her vision, because as I understand it, it is her initiative and her dedication to the cause of higher education. This is not something that has been on the agenda until now, and it is a game changer. We are at a grave moment in Ukrainian history, when our existence is challenged, our people are killed every day, swaths of territory are brought to ruin, and the ultimate aim is our complete physical and spiritual annihilation. And I think the gravity of the moment, despite the fact that we are keeping our chin up, is not lost on us. We are meeting, after all, also in the shadow of the NATO summit, on which Ukraine's survival very much depends. In the course of the war, Ukraine has garnered praise for courage, its ingenuity in the battlefield, innovations extending into major military areas such as drone technology. Its sophisticated culture is receiving recognition as never before in world museums. Its highly educated refugee workforce is sought after. Its students and scholars have found temporary refuge in many educational institutions around the world. But now the Ukrainian state has decided to become inventive in the area in which it has had less a presence on the international stage, and that is the support of intellectual work. The development of Ukrainian studies in the United States and globally, and strengthening its role in policy, is not only in the Ukrainian national interest, but also in the U.S. national interest and in the interest of countries around the world. Our theme today is one of partnership, but it is an initiative that Ukraine has to be very much behind. I have the honor here of representing the Shevchenko Scientific Society, the oldest academic organization. It was founded by private donations 150 years ago. And the term scientific is a little bit of a misnomer because it is scientific in the sense that the Central Europeans and East Europeans use it, the Ukrainian Nauka, German Wissenschaft, the systematic pursuit of knowledge, learning, and scholarship. It was funded by philanthropists from Eastern Ukraine, and it, in fact, was tasked with laying the intellectual foundation for the future nation. Its president, Mikhailo Hrushevsky, who led the transformation of this society, not only wrote the fundamental history of Ukraine that challenged the Russian imperial history, but went on to become the country's first president. I pause on this foundational moment not to tout my own organization, but to emphasize once again the importance of scholarship, and specifically the humanities, for a state's existence. It grounds the nation's identity, it lays the foundation for the education of its citizenry, it gives its elites a sense of purpose and understanding of who they are. It is as much a national security issue as military and economic strength, as has been mentioned about culture already. And it is heartening to know that we are approaching this subject. The other theme I would like to raise is in my capacity as editor and employee and a research fellow at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. The keynote speaker was to be our director, Professor Serhiy Plokhy, who unfortunately has run into a medical issue and sends his regrets. The experience of the example of that institute demonstrates the importance of institutional support, because it was founded by two distinguished scholars, Omelian Pritsak and Ihor Shevchenko, who somehow, by engaging a network of like-minded scholars, were able to persuade the Harvard administration to accept money for 3 permanently endowed chairs and a research institute. This is the one, as was mentioned, Ukrainian Studies Center in the United States that can give serious institutional support to a full range of academic activities, teaching, publishing, visiting, research fellowships. And it is difficult to overstate its sway over the last 5 decades. There's practically no one teaching in the field of Ukrainian studies today who hasn't passed through that institution at one time or another. The 2-month Summer Institute, for example, has been a very important source of language teaching for people entering the field. For Ukrainian studies in other universities, and here I'm probably going to insult a whole lot of people, the situation has been more challenging because it has had less of an institutional backing and less support and less security, shall we say. As the field of Slavic studies, as we know, expanded in the United States largely as a response to the Cold War. And while Western governments poured resources into Russian research centers at universities to study history and politics, Slavic departments and other venues focused on language, literature, and cultivated a rather uncritical attitude towards that culture's imperial essence. Most departments of Slavic studies became with time almost exclusively Russocentric. And Ukrainian studies were generally based on the goodwill and the interest of individuals. Professors who received positions in another field, but nonetheless continued to work academically, produce books, and keep the the intellectual ferment going. In the 1960s and 70s, and especially going into the 80s, despite these challenges, the Ukrainian academic scene was quite vibrant. The Ukrainians who were able to secure positions, as I mentioned, were able to nurture a new generation of scholars who took over. There was a critical mass, there was a group of students that were able to continue their interest, and Ukrainian studies was a very, I would say, a very productive enterprise. However, this intellectual ferment was largely insular. It had very little influence on the outside field. Save for a few examples, for example, the introduction of the word Kievan Rus instead of Kievan Russia, words such as the introduction of the theme of the Ukrainian Holodomor for the 50th anniversary were things that had an impact. The Ukrainian independence of 1991 had the effect of bringing in students of non-Ukrainian background into the field, particularly with the opening up of archives and the opportunity to travel to Ukraine. However, they brought very little structural change to the study of Ukraine in American academia. Slavic departments, and to a large extent history as well, remained hotbeds of what some would now call Ruski Mir, an enamored, uncritical embrace of everything to do with Russian Empire. The field had undergone a kind of revolution against the original Cold War years, and with the advent of postmodernism, there was a greater interest in the non-geopolitical conflict, the Stalinist kitchen, the daily life of us ordinary citizens. However, any discussion of the national dimension of the USSR was seen as unobjective and a vestige of the Cold War. The curious fact is that postmodernism created a tectonic shift in Western scholarship beginning in the 1980s, causing all Western cultures to reevaluate their imperial past in the most minute detail, from the level of language, semiotics, the cultural Orientalism of Edward Said, the post-colonial theory of Gayatri Spivak Homi Bhabha, the oppressive power of institutions, Foucault. None of this had the slightest impact on the study of the Russian Empire, save perhaps Alexander Etkin's positing of internal colonization, where Russians are equal victims of oppression of their own empire and thus hold no accountability for the imperial construct. American scholars, sometimes with limited language skills and highly reliant on their Russian research assistants and Russian proper, bought into this completely, with less than optimal policy implications. If things had been different, we may not have had the Budapest Memorandum in the form that we did, and Croatia and Bosnia may have had a different experience in the Yugoslav wars. We may also have been expecting a different result from the NATO summit than we are likely to get. So what can be done? Russia has always been extremely attentive to soft power in academia and culture, from the very first days of Bolshevik rule, when cultural figures fanned out all over Europe to search for goodwill among academic elites. But occasionally, at a time such as this, a moment comes when a moral imperative begins to take hold. Shortly after the full-scale aggression began, on May 16, 2002, a remarkable event happened. There was a Zoom meeting with President Zelensky and the presidents of several dozen American universities, the American Association of Association of American Universities. Not all, by any means, were there. Harvard wasn't, for example, but Princeton and Yale were. The subject was purportedly the future of Ukrainian higher education, and president after president asked, what can be done? I think it's possibly time to follow up on those conversations. So, since the full-scale invasion of many universities of Ukraine, many universities have accepted Ukrainian students and scholars on temporary research appointments. The presence of hundreds of talented Ukrainians has made a difference for Ukraine itself and for spreading and gaining respect and spreading information about Ukraine's intellectual heritage and achievements. However, all of these courses are temporary in the meantime, and even those universities where classes where there are Ukrainian programs, they need more support. One of the things, we cannot continue to have a situation where 90% of Slavic studies is Russian studies, when there are so many other nations, Poland, the Czech Republic, Ukraine, and others who also deserve recognition. So what do Ukrainian studies need? They need tenure-track appointments, not temporary appointments. Tenure-track appointments that are hardwired into departmental budgets. Undergraduates, majors, and minors that the various disparate Ukrainian courses can lead to a degree. Language requirements for undergraduate degrees that do require Ukrainian. And a robust budget for extracurricular activities. We can remember that during the Cold War, there was not, there are many arguments to counter this. For example, there is no demand, there is no student interest, there is no qualified personnel to teach, there are no textbooks. There was not an outcry, there was not a huge demand among the North American public for Russian studies during the Cold War either. However, money was found, institutions were created, and the field grew, the field developed. Something along those lines. The fact that Ukraine has now taken it upon themselves to support Ukrainian studies in North America, the fact that we have such a robust partnership and such understanding from European and especially from the United States governments, provides us with a real opportunity, because knowledge is really the answer to all of our ills. And the support of Ukrainian studies in this regard would be important. It would be an important strategic moment, not only for Ukraine, but for the rest of us as well. Thank you very much.
The history of Ukrainian studies in the USA is one of resilience, passion, and transformation, tracing its origins back to the aftermath of World War II. The tireless efforts of visionary émigré scholars like George Shevelov, Omelyan Pritsak, George Lucky J., and Ivan Lysiak-Rudnitsky breathed life into Ukrainian studies in North America. In the 1950s, the Shevchenko Scientific Society and the Ukrainian Academy of Arts and Sciences began organizing conferences, offering grants, and establishing libraries and archives for Ukrainian studies. These early efforts created a strong academic community and set the stage for future developments. In 1973, the Mikhailo Hrushevsky Professorship of Ukrainian History at Harvard University evolved into the renowned Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute under Omelyan Pritsak, marking a pivotal moment. This marked the formal recognition of Ukrainian studies at a prestigious institution. The field took another leap in 1989, when George Grabowich led the creation of the American Association for Ukrainian Studies. It was a time of growth and consolidation, when a diverse network of scholars from across the country came together to form a stronger community dedicated to the field. The collapse of the USSR in 1991 was a seismic event. How did it influence the study of Ukraine? Overnight, major universities across the U.S. were reimagining their departments that had previously focused on the USSR. Those departments transformed into different centers for post-Soviet, East European, or Eurasian studies, and some Ukrainian topics found their way into the curricula. Yet, this integration was not without its challenges. Many programs still saw the region through the narrow lens of Russian language and archives, which limited the scope of Ukrainian studies. Columbia University's Harriman Institute stood out as a beacon of progress with its Ukrainian Studies program, launched in 1995, offering a more comprehensive and nuanced approach. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine highlighted the urgent need to strengthen Ukrainian studies in the United States. Our responsibility is to challenge the Russia-centrism of broader regional studies and explore contemporary interdisciplinary issues that will make Ukrainian studies flourish. We deeply appreciate all the donors who have supported Ukrainian studies over the years. Their invaluable contributions have been and will be crucial for the development of this field, ensuring its growth and impact on academic discourse, and ultimately influencing policies that can shape the world.
So sadly, at this point, we're going to have to say goodbye to Madam Shevchenko, our First Lady of Ukraine, Madam Zelensky, I'm sorry, as we're running a little late here today, but maybe a final thank you to the First Lady for gracing us with our presence here today. And now it's time for our first panel, and I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator of our first panel. It's Ambassador John Herbst, who's director of the Eurasian Center at the Atlantic Council, and he will introduce the members of the first panel. So, Ambassador, please.
I'll wind up sitting down, but I'll make the announcements of the panelists from up here. So we'll do it in alphabetical order. Someone I've known for 40 plus years, Dr. Gene Fischel, associated with George Mason University, but I knew him from the State Department. He's a distinguished fellow with the Center for Security Policy Studies at George Mason. He taught at George Washington's University Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies, and at Georgetown's Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service. He served, as I've mentioned, at the State Department, but also at the National Security Council, the Office of the Vice President, the National Intelligence Council, and he is the author of The Moscow Factor, U.S. Foreign Policy Towards Sovereign Ukraine and the Kremlin, published by the Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute, and distributed by Harvard University Press. Gene, why don't you come up and sit down? Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Kravchuk of Indiana University at Bloomington. He is a National Academy of Public Administration Fellow, is an internationally recognized expert in public administration, public finance, and political economy with a special emphasis on Ukraine and Russia. He has served as a member of numerous U.S. Treasury Department expert missions to former Soviet and East European countries. His administrative posts have included service as the U.S. Treasury Resident Budget Advisor to the Minister of Finance of Ukraine, and he's been appointed by the U.S. Secretaries of State and the Treasury as financial advisor to the President of Bosnia-Herzegovina and Undersecretary in the Connecticut State Office of Policy and Management. Dr. Kravchuk, if you're here. And next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Yulia Ladigina of Penn State University. She's an assistant professor of Slavic and Global and International Studies. Her research on East European literatures and cultures focuses on questions of cultural memory and cultural exchange. She is the author of Bridging East and West, Olha Kabylyanska, Ukraine's Pioneering Modernist, a University of Toronto Press book, came out in 2019. And she is currently working on her second book, The Real, with the R-E-E-L, Story of Russia's War Against Ukraine, which examines the post-2014 cycle of Ukrainian war films and their perspective on the hybrid nature of modern war and its mediatization. Dr. Ladigina. You preempted me, always a good thing. Okay, next, Dr. Johann Petrovsky Stern of Northwestern University. He is the Crown Family Professor of Jewish Studies and a Professor of Jewish History in the History Department of Northwestern. He teaches a variety of courses that include early modern and modern Jewish history, Jewish material culture, history and the culture of Ukraine, origins of Zionism, and Slavic Jewish literary interaction. He has published more than 100 articles and 8 books and edited volumes, 3 of them award-winning, including The Anti-Imperial Choice, The Making of the Ukrainian Jew in 2009, Jews and Ukrainians, Volume 26 in 2011, Cultural Interference of Jews and Ukrainians, A Field in the Making, published in 2014. Dr. Petrovsky Stern, please. And I might add, it's not on the sheet, that he's been heavily involved in the Ukrainian-Jewish encounter, which has done very important work, historical and cultural, in the last decade. Finally, not least, Dr. William Parmans, who I've also known for a long time, at the Kennan Institute's Wilson Center. He's the director of the Kennan Institute, an expert guide to the complexities of political and economic developments in Russia and Ukraine, particularly looking at the law. He is also the author of Law and the Russian State, Russia's Legal Evolution from Peter the Great to Vladimir Putin, which came out by Bloomsbury in 2018. Will? This is a group of very smart people who know this subject very well. We understand from the statements made already and the film the political and even geopolitical importance of a proper understanding of Russian history and Ukrainian history, and how the Russian imperial view of history, a straight line going back to Karamzin, through Solovyov to Kluchevsky, down to its American-Russian avatars, Karpovich at Harvard, Vernadsky at Yale, has had a seminal influence on how experts have looked at Eurasia, and an influence which has been baleful when you see it as providing a justification for aggression, which very much goes against the wishes of the many peoples in Eastern Europe and Eurasia. And with that, we'll all sit down and we'll have our panel conversation. Better. Okay. I had prepared some questions, which was not the brightest thing I've done in the last 2 weeks. And so we're going to start, most of our panelists, or some of our panelists have prepared remarks, and we will start with them. I think, given the conversation I've already had, we'll start with Will Pomerantz. And Will, you will keep it to 5 minutes, yes? Yes, I will. Please. Your choice. I started up there because whatever you want to do. Good.
Okay, I want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to talk about the future of Ukrainian studies in the United States. Since the founding 50 years ago, the Kennan Institute has supported Ukrainian scholarship. We have also had a dedicated program focusing on Ukraine since its independence in 1991. The list of scholars who have held fellowships at the Kennan is diverse and impressive. Ukrainian alumni continue to play an active, vital role in the success of our program. The Kennan Institute is committed to promoting Ukrainian scholars and scholarship internationally. I want to suggest that we highlight the contributions of Ukrainians and European global culture. To maintain my brevity, which I've promised to do, I will also make the case for studying Ukraine not just in area studies, but in the larger disciplines by reflecting on my own academic career. As a historian and a practitioner of law, I have in recent years come to recognize the prominent role that Ukrainian jurists have played in developing theories of rule of law as well as in international law. And I want to start with the writings of the legal scholar Bogdan Kistiakowski. I first came across Kistiakowski in my research and my search for a PhD topic, always a stressful event. But eventually I hit gold by finding out about Bogdan Kistiakowski and his essay in defense of law. I was immediately fascinated by how the law had been underestimated as a weakness in the Russian Empire, and Kistiakowski criticized the intelligentsia's failure to embrace civil law as the foundation of the Tsarist legal system. This was the spark for my writing on the Russian legal profession, which I wrote on in my dissertation. This essay in defense of law is more than 100 years old, but its takedown of Russia's legal consciousness still resonates today. Indeed, it could have been written yesterday. I only learned later, however, was Kistiakowski straddled multiple universes. He was part of the Russian intelligentsia and its debates, but he also was, as the historian Susan Heumann illuminates in her seminal biography, a leading proponent of Ukrainian statehood, civil rights, constitutionalism, and federalism. He was born in Kiev in 1868, the son of a prominent scholar specializing on Ukrainian customary law. He had the distinction of being expelled from at least 4 Russian universities before he went to the philosophy department in Germany and ultimately collaborated with Max Weber. He also was an adherent to the sociological school of law, which connects him to such eminent legal scholars as Germany's Rudolf von Jhering, Russia's Sergei Moryomtsov, and Roscoe Pound and the U.S. Law and Society movement. So any study of law at the end of the Tsarist period must find a place for Bogdan Kistiakowski, but should also include the context of his life. Secondarily, the study of international law must also recognize the influence of Ukrainian-born jurists who had an important impact on transitional justice after World War II. Here, I turn to the work of international human rights lawyer Philippe Sands and his book East-West Street. The book traces Sands' family roots in Lviv, but also reveals the roots of prominent lawyers who played a critical role at Nuremberg and whose thinking still shapes the system of international criminal justice. It turns out that the author of the charge Crimes Against Humanity, Hirsch Lautenbach, and the author of the term genocide, Raphael Lemkin, both attended Lemberg University. Today, these concepts are being used by Ukrainian and European lawyers as they seek to hold Russia accountable for its war crimes in Ukraine, including updating the crime of aggression, which has not been prosecuted since World War II. Ukraine's influence on international law only continues to grow with the award of the Nobel Peace Prize to the Center for Civil Liberties. Karim Khan of the ICC, a prosecutor for the ICC, also gives credit to Ukraine for documenting war crimes and keeping the focus on justice. By acknowledging the works of such eminent lawyers as Kistiakowski, Lautenbach, Lemkin, and others, we have the chance to complete the effects of Ukraine. We have a chance to deal with the impact of Ukrainianness on vital scholarship and to the people of Ukraine squarely on the Western and create Russia as part of the Western legal tradition. Therefore, I just want to close by thanking again the organizers of this meeting and which wish to emphasize the contributions to major legal developments in other fields and the knowledge also must be on the agenda of Ukrainian studies. And with that, I'll end my remarks.
Admirably brief. Okay, Dr. Petrovsky-Stern.
I would like to start by thanking my colleagues who are here in the room, who made me part of big Ukrainian diasporic world in the United States, and making me the secretary, the scientific secretary of the Shevchenko Scientific Society, the fellow at Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, and of many other Ukrainian organizations, including Kyiv Mohyla Academy, where I was appointed Dr. Honoris Causa, the honorary doctor, in 2014. So thank you, colleagues, friends, everybody who is here, who came to celebrate with us the rebirth and reconstruction of Ukrainian studies in the United States and in Ukraine. I was asked to talk about evil things. How we ended up having that Russocentric prism on Eastern Europe and on Ukraine. What is going on in American academia? How and why we have a situation when the majority of pundits and people who have to say something about Ukraine are Putin first-stayers and do not see Ukraine because of their Russocentric lens. So I'll make a couple of points very briefly as an incentive for the upcoming conversation. Number one, in my conversation, my exchange with Ambassador Herbst, we had an impression that the Russian studies actually started with Karamzin and with the great Russian historians of the early 19th century. Actually, the person who is the most influential Russian historian today in the Russocentric world, let's call it Ruski Mir, Russian realm, is of course Vasily Khrushchevsky. Most important American scholars, starting from Karpovich at Harvard, and of course Vernadsky, and of course people such as Bruce Lincoln, and up till modern times, Richard Pipes, Diana Conker, they are all coming from the school of Vasily Khrushchevsky. And we have to understand that it is the Khrushchevsky's vision of what Russia is about and what Russian-Ukrainian relations are about that shape the prism, shape the scope, and the approach to Ukrainian studies in the United States. So what is this theory to begin with? First of all, Khrushchevsky is coming out with a myth that is a very influential political myth. He says there was a united, unified Slavic culture in the medieval duchy known as Kievan Rus, and it is the unifying culture of the ancient Slavs that in the upcoming centuries everybody was to come back and to kind of reconstruct this unity. In course of the Mongol invasion and then Lithuanian and then Polish invasion, the three different cultures appeared, and it is the white Russian culture, Belaruskaya kultura, the Russian culture, the Russian Ruskaya kultura, and the Ukrainska kultura, the Ukrainian culture. So these three different cultures and three different languages developed over time, but, and here Khrushchevsky is saying something important, all other cultures but Russian can be народности, but cannot be narodi. That is to say, only Russia can be a state-making nation, but everybody else is just an ethnicity. So, and this condescending attitude to Belarusians, to Ukrainians, to everybody else in the Slavic world has been kind of transformed in the new political language, in the language of academia, and it is today kind of sine qua non, something not disputed in the Russian studies. So this is number one. Number two, what is the place of Ukraine in that particular Russocentric vision? Ukrainians are allowed to be a narodnost, they are allowed to be an ethnic group, they are allowed to build their rural, very important, rural culture and rural civilization. Please sing your shchedrik, please, dance your hopak, eat your borscht, and show us your beautiful Ukrainian girls in the countryside, but that is the end of it, okay? You have no right to build any kind of urban civilization. By the way, Putin is destroying Kharkiv and Lviv and Starokonstantinov and інші українські міста and other Ukrainian cities precisely because Ukrainians started to build urban culture in the 20th century. He cannot tolerate that as a true disciple of Vasily Khrushchevsky. So that is something that Ukrainians can have in the Russian imperial arrangement, in the Soviet arrangement, only in the post-Soviet arrangement. They cannot have any kind of sovereignty which is state-based. Now, if so, what to do with Ukrainian strivings for sovereignty? What to do with the short-lived Ukrainian independence in 1917-1920? What to do with what's going on in Ukraine after 1991? Well, Khrushchevsky and his disciples and Putin first-stayers have an excellent answer to this question. In 1705, 1709, I'm a historian, I have to go back. There was a situation when Ukrainian hetman Mazepa, according to the Russian sources, betrayed our great Russian Tsar Peter the Great, trying to make arrangements behind the back of Peter the Great with Charles XII of Sweden. Starting from that time, there appeared in Russian historiography the word Mazepinstvo, meaning people who would like to associate with Mazepa and who would like to betray the great Russian culture, Russian civilization, and Russian czars. So, if you are as Shevchenko, or as Petlura, or as anybody else after 1991, or as Ukrainian dissidents, if you are staying for Ukrainian independence, you are a Mazepinets, you are a traitor. That is to say, in the Russian mentality, there is no way to see the justice of Ukrainians striving for independence, which is always called, dubbed, labeled as Mazepinstvo. So this is the situation with which we are dealing with when we come to the Russian-centric studies. And I'm saying that because this particular vision has inundated the field. And people should know better, but they don't. And many, I would say 95% of wonderful, great, excellent scholars in the United States and in Europe who do Russian studies share that particular vision of Ukraine, and this is what we have to deal with on a regular basis. It's a powerful myth, it's a political myth. We need to do something to counteract. Thank you.
I can confirm that a lot of the experts on this part of on East Europe and Eurasia in the State Department were taught this history, and this guides their view of how they look at things. So, thank you, Professor. Also admirably brief. Professor Ladigina, he talked a little bit about the Russian view of history. Before I went to Ukraine as a diplomat, I had also been reared, you might say, on Russian historiography, and I made sure I read a Ukrainian historian on Ukraine, Orestes Subtelny. And as I began to read that book, I wondered, who's this guy Volodymyr? Right? And who's this guy Danilo of Galicia? Why is he important? And I realized as I was fighting with the book in my head, I was coming against a different interpretation of history. No less valid, and actually probably more valid, than one that I had been schooled in. And with that, Dr. Ladigina.
Thank you so much. I want to start also by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to be here and share my insights. And also I want to thank everyone present here, the representatives of the Ukrainian government, of the American government, and the representatives of diaspora who have supported Ukrainian studies for so long and who are, to a great degree, with their dedication, funds, and resources, kept the spirit and laid the foundations for our conversations today. I'm on this panel, if you didn't get the message, thus far to represent the positive and the success stories of Ukrainian scholarship in the United States as a Ukrainian who was able to pursue graduate studies here, write research and do research on Ukrainian topics and secure a tenured position in their institution that offers Ukrainian studies program and has a richly endowed fund. Thank you to the Waskop family for that. To offer courses in Ukrainian language and literature, and to design courses that go beyond the field of Ukrainian studies, that integrate Ukrainian content, and to have a discussion with administration on how to develop and where the program could go and how we can grow Ukrainian studies in our institution and broadly in American academia. So I go back to the question and the discussion of the myth and historiography and how Ukraine is perceived today and how detrimental the Russocentric narrative has been. As a literary scholar, I want to start with the point that all narratives, historical narrative including, are constructs, they're inventions. They are highly politicized and weaponized when it comes to history, but luckily by their very nature, they are open to deconstruction, revisions, and reinvention and reframing. And Ukrainians have done that. My colleague, Dr. Petrovsky-Stern, just mentioned the mid-18th century that was so instrumental in shaping the Russocentric narrative. But this is exactly what, when Ukrainian, Russian imperial at the time, historian Kostomaro also pointed out that Ukrainians are different, and he highlighted that word vola that Madam Borovets was mentioning, something that made Ukrainians distinct, that drive for freedom, that has a historical roots in the way how decisions were made in Ukraine, the way to decide on communal policies. So Hrushevsky was the historian who came up with the new narrative, placing Ukraine in the center of his research and arguing that Ukrainians and Belarusians and Russians are distinct people with distinct identities, and their history deserves different approach and different framework. He was also the one who centered Ukraine and tied Ukraine to the history of Europe by focusing on the period and elaborating on the connection and centrality of Ukraine in Polish-Lithuanian kingdom, and by doing that, pulling it away from that Russian autocratic imperial narrative. In 20th century, many Ukrainian historians welcomed the concept and built up and followed up on Hrushevsky's work, which is a foundation of contemporary Ukrainian historiography. But they were outnumbered in the Soviet context by Soviet historiographers and often went a little bit too far by trying to present a different narrative and construct a story of 1,000 years of Ukrainian statehood or nationhood, which was very vulnerable to accusations of lack of objectivity, nationalism, and was often discarded. But luckily, as Halyna Hryn pointed out, and many of my colleagues, with the fall of the Soviet Union and cross-pollination of scholarship between Ukraine and United States, new approaches have been adopted by historians that use more sociological and cultural methodology that focus on very specific themes and questions, as opposed to trying to come up with grand narratives. And that's the future of, and that's the presentation of Ukraine in the future of historiography, where Ukraine is positioned as a place, as an arena of not only local and regional developments, but global trends and world history, where so many people came into contact and influenced the developments that go beyond Ukraine. And I think I will wrap up just by mentioning the new project that Tim Snyder just piloted that brings together 90 scholars from different fields who work on 70 different topics and different area studies. And the goal is to come up with a new type of Ukrainian history and vision that takes into consideration this multiple connections and cross-pollinations of different peoples and different historical moments through time. So if we can focus on supporting this type of projects, which are currently funded by private money, and find a way to also create institutions that can sustain such scholarship, we would be really making great differences and tackling those narratives that don't stand ground, but yet are so influential in our decision-making today.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Dr. Kravchuk, you're allowed to go wherever you choose to go, but if I could just ask you to consider one thing as you do that. There have been some articles basically since the large Kremlin invasion about the need to decolonize the cultural studies of Ukrainian and other countries that have been under the thumb of Moscow for centuries. How do you think, what are the prospects for that, please?
Well, as you may notice, I'm not Sarah Phillips. Unfortunately, I'd like to apologize. She can't be here. She's contracted COVID and so was unable to travel from Indiana. She did provide me with some of her talking points, however, and I'll address the decolonization issue here in a moment. I'd like to just begin by affirming everything that's already been said about the need to reorient Ukrainian studies along the lines of a more secure path to the truth about the past. Oscar Wilde once said, and I'm sure I'm paraphrasing him, is that one of our most important duties to the past is to rewrite it, and to rewrite it along the lines of new discoveries. You know, and one of the interesting sayings, humorous sayings of the former Soviet Union was that in the USSR, the past is hard to predict. Well, we understand why at this point. But I'd like to look at the past in terms of how it can prepare us to create a better future. I'm a public administrationist and a public finance scholar within that field, and it's what took me to Ukraine to begin with. And I've had a chance now in a number of contexts to observe technical and development assistance projects. And it seems to me that one of the most important lessons is that they cannot succeed context-free. One of the most important reasons for strengthening Ukrainian studies in the U.S. is to prepare technical assistants and scholars and others for the rebuilding of higher education in Ukraine. And of course, my interest is in administrative experts, especially in the field of urban management, to rebuild the country. But it's got to be based in Ukrainian history, culture, governance. It can't be done from afar, as much as the text in PA and public finance would lead you to believe. Universal principles of management, yeah, that's a good starting point, but they've always got to be adapted to and grounded in the culture of the people who are being served by the civil service. And as a consequence, it's really important as we think about rebuilding the system of higher education in Ukraine and in particular education for civil service roles within the government, that we be very, very sensitive to this particular need. I'd like to say a couple of things about what is being done, and using Sarah's talking points, which she was so gracious to provide me with last night. With respect to Indiana University, as you know, the Robert F. Burns Russian and East European Institute has been committed to Ukrainian studies for many years, offering several Slavic languages on a regular basis, including Ukrainian. In the recent past, we've been very active in supporting Ukrainian scholars during the war in terms of what's known as a non-resident fellows program, which assists scholars who, for personal, professional, or legal reasons, are unable to leave Ukraine. Each one of them receives a $5,000 stipend, a faculty partner at IU, and electronic access to the IU libraries. We have, to date, been able to support 69 non-resident scholars who participate remotely, but also there is part of this program a product that they have to produce, and they present that then to a forum that enjoys some campus-wide support. These are scholars not just in history or the humanities, but across the spectrum, even including extending to the medical sciences. And so there's a wide participation among the faculty across campus and across our regional campuses as well. The money that has been raised has come not only from the university, but many faculty have stepped up and provided thousands of dollars to support their counterparts in Ukraine as a consequence. Certain highly productive research collaborations have been fostered as a consequence of these non-residential fellowship stipends. And we're currently engaged in expanding the program in partnership with other Big Ten universities as well. As to decolonization, you know, there isn't really much positive to be said about the ongoing conflict and its consequences for Ukraine, Europe, and the world. But if there is even a small bright spot, it's that now increasing numbers of Americans and Westerners understand the distinction between a Ukrainian and a Russian in a very, very intimate and important way. And so we find there's increasing interest and decreasing obstacles within several universities that we know of that are expanding offerings in Ukrainian studies and language. In particular, efforts at Syracuse University, University of Richmond, Colgate University. Sarah did a little inventory before she passed on her notes to me. New courses being introduced as part of the core Slavic Studies curriculum. Russian history itself is starting to be taught from interesting new and critical perspectives, especially regarding autocracy, serfdom, race, and radicalization. There's also more focus recently on 20th and 21st century history. Purdue University in Indiana also has some residential programs for Ukrainian scholars. I'm sure I'm leaving some out, so please feel free to mention these as well if you would, if we have some Q&A. The University of Illinois has a Ukrainian Studies major. There are Ukrainian Studies minors at several U.S. universities, in particular Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and the University of Texas at Austin, significantly in a red state. Some have expanded what used to be called Russian Studies majors to include Ukraine and other Eastern European countries. Obstacles remain, however. Some of them are, as a consequence of institutional inertia. We have many tenured-in faculty who teach Russian studies. Russian is still the predominant language that is taught in Eastern European programs. And we have a great need for additional funding from U.S. government and major foundations as well. There are opportunities here to build collaborative programs with Ukrainian universities, especially where there's been some joint efforts in the past. For Indiana, this would include, for instance, the National University of Kiev-Mohyla Academy, the National Economics University in Kyiv, Shevchenko State University, and the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv as well. In closing, I think it's really important to be thinking about how to expand collaborations across the disciplines with respect to American and Ukrainian universities. I retired last year from the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs, so we have an environmental sciences side, really lab scientists working side by side with the social scientists and others. And what I can say with a great deal of confidence is there's probably nothing dirtier on the planet than a battlefield. When you think about the spent fuel, when you think about the gunpowder, black powder that has been expended and fallen to the ground, the heavy metals, depleted uranium shells, and not to mention the unaccounted for human and animal remains as a consequence of the conflict. A comprehensive inventory of the damage has got to be performed. I don't really know of any organization that is performing such an inventory today, but a great deal of surveys, soil and water samples, mapping of this needs to take place, as well as, this will not only inform improvements in the agricultural sector, but will also have implications for the relocation and the rebuilding of many settlements, villages, cities, and towns as well. And so these collaborations will become much, much more important. But once again, this has to be set in the context of what Ukraine actually needs, and that's where Ukrainian studies can come into play in thinking about the rebuilding effort.
Dr. Archer, thank you very much. Excellent jumping in. Thank you very much. Okay, so Jean, you've been following Ukraine and Russia at the State Department for decades. It's worth noting that Moscow's aggression against Ukraine began in Crimea, and much commentary on the war stressed and stresses Moscow's quote-unquote historical ties to Crimea as a justification for, or at least a mitigation of, Moscow's seizure of the peninsula. Such public commentary barely acknowledges the rights of the people, the Crimean Tatars, who have a much greater historical association with Crimea, and who for years have been victims of Soviet and Russian rule there. Many in the US and Europe speak of Crimea as something Ukraine might have to abandon as part of its peace with Moscow. Is this an example of how an unbalanced view of history has a serious impact, and a negative one, on policy developments?
Thank you for that question. Let me first say how thrilled I am to be here and to participate in my academic capacity. Let me underscore that. Thank you, of course, to the Academy for hosting this important event. I'd like to acknowledge Deputy Foreign Minister Borovets, of course, and Undersecretary Allan as well. They're contributing big chunks of their time to be at this event, and it's very much appreciated. Congratulations, of course, to the organizers as well. This event is well timed for obvious reasons. Advancing Ukrainian studies, understanding of Ukraine, its role in that part of the world is very much part of Ukrainian security going forward, as well as Undersecretary Allan mentioned already in her remarks. It's also crucial to bring scholarship and policy together in appropriate ways for obvious reasons. In terms of Ambassador Herbst's question, there are several layers within that question. I'll just try to address them briefly in the interest of time. So very much appreciate the question. The short answer, this is Washington after all, is yes. Ahistorical views tend to lead to bad policy outcomes. I think we can generally accept that. There's one example of a former US president, and I'm not picking on anyone in particular, so please bear that in mind, who referred to Ukraine as a client state and asserted that Russia cares more about Ukraine than we do. No, it's not that former president, and that's the point I'm trying to make here, and that is that we've seen a lack of understanding of Ukraine, its importance across administrations, no matter what the political affiliation maybe not just across administrations here, but also across Western countries more broadly speaking. Just broadly speaking as well, Western governments have very much underestimated Moscow's and especially Putin's appetite, especially when it comes to Ukraine, but not just. It is clear that the Kremlin seeks to destroy Ukrainian statehood and Ukrainian identity, both of those aspects. There's another way of putting that. It seeks to destroy Ukraine and Ukrainians, and there's a word for that. I would urge you to look up the work of Raphael Lemkin, someone who is a Polish Cultural Association, but a Jewish Ukrainian from Western Ukraine. He wrote a little bit about that particular word and that issue. In fact, if I remember correctly, he coined it. The notion that Crimea, as you referenced, or another piece of Ukraine would satisfy Putin is hugely misleading, and there's no basis for that assertion whatsoever. There's also no basis to Moscow's special relationship with the peninsula or supposed special claim to the peninsula. The so-called historical ties are a little more than manifestations of Moscow's predatory impulses towards various parts of Ukrainian territory. Don't believe me, just ask the Crimean Tatars, the people that you mentioned, the largest indigenous people of the currently Russian-occupied Ukrainian peninsula. Now, the dynamic that my colleagues on this panel have talked about in terms of area studies, and there's too strong a focus by far on Russian studies at the expense of the others, that dynamic has generated overlapping circles of ignorance that permeate not just the academic community, but also think tank community and frankly, policy community as well. I think Halyna mentioned earlier the Kievan Russia term in her terrific presentation. There was a History of Russia book for many years. There was a canonical for many people that actually referred to the Kievan Rus as Kievan Russia. It was fixed later, but nevertheless, it's an example of how just misconstrued regional knowledge is and regional education is in a number of Western countries still. Ukraine, has been mentioned already, is seen as a subset of Russia, if it's considered at all historically, and of Russia, not the Russian Empire, which is perhaps an important distinction. Now, if you took the time to look at U.S. government declassified archives, and I have, you would see that when the U.S. government looked at anything related to Ukraine, almost invariably it had to do with what issue, with what subject? Harvests, grain harvests. Very little attention was paid to Ukraine as a nation, as a society, as people, and that has had its consequences as well. In other words, Ukrainian studies are very necessary. Their expansion, their full resourcing is well overdue. And Ukrainian studies are not a luxury by any means. There's some real-world implications and applications that are necessary in this space. One could just mention a few historical events from last century, including the USSR's collapse, where we would have been much better off if Ukrainian studies were even fuller developed to understand that there's much more to the region. I won't even say Russia, Moscow, or the Kremlin, as Soviet studies have tended to focus over the years. We do need to gore some sacred cows as part of this process, because there are many people who have equities in the conventional wisdom, and those need to be overcome. Decolonization of policy, by the way, long-term decolonization of policy depends tremendously on decolonization of scholarship. The two are intimately related, especially over time. I should mention, of course, I should have mentioned this earlier, the great work that has been done at Hryn and other institutions as well, and not just in the United States, but in Canada. I know there are representatives here from our northern neighbor as well, but those efforts need to be strengthened. Let me just wrap up here just to again to congratulate the organizers on this event and look forward to other questions if we have time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call an audible here. We were supposed to go an hour. We started 25 minutes late. We've already gone 47 or 48 minutes. I know there's another panel after us, and then a keynote, and then a lunch or a reception. So I think we've probably covered the subject very well. I'd like to thank our panelists for this. I'd like to thank Katya Smogli for inviting me to do this, and all who've participated.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Herbst and all the panelists for your terrific presentations. We will now have a very short Blitz second podium discussion, and it is my extreme honor to invite the next round of speakers. First and foremost, Ambassador Michael McFaul, who came to us from Stanford University. Dr. Yevgen Kudryavets, First Deputy Minister of Education and Science of Ukraine. Dr. Olga Polyukhovich, Vice President for Research and Academic Affairs at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. My dear colleague, Mr. Volodymyr Sheiko, General Director of the Ukrainian Institute in Kyiv, and I will moderate this discussion. If I may ask the panelists to come to the podium as quickly as possible. I forgot to mention our final speaker, Dr. Kamila Benbow, who is Hart Dean of Education and Human Development at Vanderbilt University. Apologies. We just lost, oh, here he is, Ambassador. Please give a round of applause for Ambassador McFaul. All right. I would request that our speakers be very brief in their remarks because we have to finish this event on time. Some of our VIP guests have other engagement in town. And if Dr. Benbow will allow, I will begin this conversation with her research. This conference started with terrific remarks from First Lady of Ukraine, and we saw the video describing the tragic outcomes of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We saw human losses, we saw material losses, and your research is particularly applicable to the situation that we have right now in Ukraine, especially the situation with losses in human development, losses in social capital. So how to ensure that the next generation of Ukrainian is preserved and that Ukrainian educators can indeed raise a very strong social capital for our post-war rebuilding effort.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be included in this panel as it represents a continuation of the friendship of my university that we developed with Ukraine through the former Education and Science Minister, Anna Novosad. Anna came to Vanderbilt to study for a year with the Humphreys Fellowship Program of the U.S. Department of State. In the very year that Ukraine was invaded. Of course, she returned early to help her country, and now my university wants to help her and your country to rebuild. In that regard, my one message today is simple but imperative. Invest in your best and brightest, your human capital. This is Ukraine's Sputnik moment. Seize the opportunity. Let me explain. Today's economy is a conceptual, knowledge-based, and highly technical economy. It's global. Competitors come from all over the world, and they compete economically via ideas. The most competitive countries are those generating the best ideas that can be turned into products. So when rebuilding Ukraine, Ukraine will need to develop both the individuals who will develop the ideas that can form the basis of a new economy, its engine, and the workforce that can turn those ideas into reality. Their educational needs differ, so don't treat them the same. My focus here is on those who can become future innovators and who can create and position Ukraine's economy for the future. They are often overlooked by our educational system in spite of their societal importance. Who are they? The youth who will create the ideas that solve societal problems and transform economies. The ones who can become the creators of companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, the idea-based economies. David Lubinsky's and my 50-year longitudinal study of 5,000 highly gifted individuals who have been surveyed at age 12, 18, 23, mid-30s, and age 50, and we're waiting on them to turn 65, has definitively answered that question. The creators of future economies come from a pool of individuals who represent the top 1% in ability. We can identify them at age 12 with a simple ability tests, and there is no threshold for ability. The research has shown that more ability is better, and the higher your abilities are, the more likely you are to create creative products. Let's just give an example of doctorates. The base rate of doctorates in the US is 2%. The top 0.5% in ability, 25% of them earn doctorates. The top 1 in 10,000, 50%. I can put out forward many other variables like that. But their talents need to be developed if they are to thrive and fully contribute to the economy in only the way they can. This does not happen if they are left to languish in the regular classroom. In our study, we have looked at the impact of what happens if you intervene educationally in highly gifted youth's education during their adolescent years. So those kids who go to special programs designed for highly gifted individuals, compared to similarly able kids who did not attend those programs, can we detect a signal, an impact of that program decades later? Or do the vicissitudes of life wash out whatever initial advantage those programs provided? The answer is, it doesn't wash out. Decades later, we can still detect the signal, the impact of those programs on the lives of those individuals. They become more highly productive, more creative than the individuals who did not participate. And those other individuals never catch up. And what I like to think about is we all know how important it is to exercise our bodies. It's also important to exercise our brains. And just as with your bodies, you need exercises that challenges your bodies. So does the brain. They need opportunities that challenges the brain. So my recommendation here for Ukraine is identify your best and brightest, cast a wide net. And I'm going to end with an agricultural metaphor. Identify your seed corn, your talented kids. Plant those seeds in rich, fertile soil and provide fertilizer. That is, develop them so that they can shine, that they can develop, and that in the end, they can help rebuild Ukraine into a powerful economy that Ukraine deserves to become. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Benbow. In fact, the findings of your research bring me right to the person sitting on your left, Ambassador McFall, and Stanford University, which really singled out itself by creating a remarkable program for Ukrainian future leaders, remarkable program for Ukrainian civil society activists, scholars as well, journalists, and look at the result of this program. And in their opening remarks, I believe Dr. Will Pomerantz mentioned our first Nobel Prize winner, Alexander Matvichuk, who was a graduate of Stanford Ukrainian Leaders Program. Unfortunately, we heard that the program is no longer running due to lack of funding. Tell us a little bit more about Stanford University's plans to develop further the leadership program that you are in, and maybe other initiatives that you may consider launching in the next couple of months or years.
Well, thank you. It's a real honor to be here. I am not an expert on Ukraine. I want to say that 400 times. I am a product of the problems that were on the previous panel. I want to say that 500 times. And I'm going to end on some positive things about it. But I'll tell you the two stories about what we've done at Stanford with regards to the study of Ukraine. And they're really just two stories about what Ukrainians did for Stanford, not what Stanford did for Ukraine. So I'm going to tell you those two stories, and I'm going to give you them 3 recommendations to us all, to the U.S. government, who's still here, thank you, to all Americans, and to the Ukrainian government. All right, 2 stories. In 2005, I was hired by the U.S. Agency for International Development to go to Ukraine and to study all the great things that they did to help with the Orange Revolution, right? So I did that study. By the way, I can send it to you if you're interested. And we did a lot of great things, don't get me wrong. But my takeaway from that study was not what USAID grantees and partners did, but what incredible democratic activists Ukraine had with or without a relationship to USAID. And there's been a lot of discussion about history so far. I want to make a plea for studying contemporary Ukraine as well. There are so many myths, including in our U.S. government, including at Stanford University, including on TV every day about contemporary Ukraine. It has to be part of that. So when I got back to Stanford, I was like, these Ukrainians are incredible. Let's create a program where we bring democratic activists from all over the world, journalists, human rights activists, members of parliament, small entrepreneurs, bring them to Stanford for 3 weeks so that they can learn from each other with Ukrainians at its core. And so we've had 50 people in that program from Ukraine over the last 20 years. And I want to tell you, maybe they learned something from Fukuyama and Diamond and McFall. I'm not sure they do, to be honest. But what they really do is they teach people about their democratic struggles, and that is incredibly inspirational. So for all, I have 55 names, I could read them. I'm not going to do that, but they are some superstars from Ukraine that you all know. I know this room knows them, and I just want to say thank you for educating Stanford professors, but also democratic activists around the world. That's story number 1. Story number 2, our Ukrainian leadership program. It wasn't my idea, folks. It was Ukrainians' ideas. They came to me a decade ago, and these are also prominent people you know. One of them is your defense minister right now. His name is Rustam Umerov. He was an entrepreneur, and he came to my office. I'd never met him before. And he's like, Mike, we are trying to create a great country. You do great leadership training programs here at Stanford. Why don't we have Ukrainians here? And I said, Rustam, we don't have dedicated money for that. And he said, we will finance it. Think about how odd that is. Stanford University, one of the richest universities in the world, And 10 years ago, it was guys like Rustem, Slava Vakarchuk, you might know Slava. Slava was another one of the funders, and some other people in this room funded this program to bring Ukrainian superstars to spend a year at Stanford. And you're right, they're doing all kinds of great things. Lesia Matvichuk, we're very proud of her. Yes, she was with us before she won the Nobel Peace Prize, but they're serving in the military, they're serving in the government, they're fighting corruption, they're in the parliament. Sasha Ustinova is one of the champions for getting more assistance, military assistance, every day to Ukraine. And Yulia Besverchenko is right here with us, one of our superstars who's part of Ukraine House to put this together. So I want to say thank you to Ukrainians for doing that as well. And then, when Putin invaded your country, when Putin barbarically invaded your country, doing horrific things, I don't like the language we use about the way we describe that. War of aggression, that is not the right term. Barbaric invasion of Ukraine is the better term. When he did that, we made a principled decision at Stanford. We cannot ask people from Ukraine to be sending their resources to Stanford University during this horrible time. So we suspended, suspended is the right word. But it has to continue. And I'm just speaking about Stanford, but I would say this about 99% of the other universities. We all saw the superstar universities represented on your first panel. The rest of us are not doing as well. And here I want to end with three things we have to do. Number one, the U.S. government has to deploy more of its resources to educating Americans about Ukraine and about Ukrainian. Let me tell you a little story about my own education. I did a master's degree, and back then it was called Soviet and East European Studies, right? We got to get rid of all these Soviet this, Russia this. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But one of the requirements to get funding to do that degree, and it was really smart by the State Department, was that I got a FLAS fellowship, which I'm sure a lot of people know here, but not in Russian. I specifically had to study a non-Russian language somewhere in the region, and I was selected to study Polish. And for a year I studied Polish at Stanford, and I spent 2 summers in Krakow at Jagiellonian University. Without that intervention from the United States government, I would have never studied Polish. And I believe having that experience back in the late 80s fundamentally changed the way I thought about the Soviet Union and Russia. So, number one, we need to have those direct interventions where you compel, force is too strong a word, compel people to learn things that they otherwise wouldn't learn. Number two, it was said earlier, I just want to associate myself with the comments earlier. We need endowed professors of Ukrainian studies. It is not enough to bring adjunct professors. It is not enough, as we do. You know, these superstars we bring from Ukraine, they teach, but it is not enough because it's not fundamental. It won't change the way we teach our students, people at Stanford that 20 or 30 years later are become secretaries of state and presidents, right? We want them to have foundational education in Ukraine, and it should not be part of a Slavic or Russian studies program. And I've seen this, Harvard's done it brilliantly. We at Stanford did it with Iranian studies, where a donor said, I don't want Iranian studies being part of the Middle East. I don't want it being part of the Arab world. You Americans, he came to me, his name's Hamid Moghadam, and he said, you Americans, you're so arrogant about my country. Arrogant and ignorant. He said both. We're not part of the Middle East. Persians are not, I mean, I'm not going to go into the whole thing. You know this story. This room knows this story. But after years of frustration with it, he just said, let's start an Iranian studies program, and it's not in a center on the study of the Middle East. That was transformational for changing the way our students at Stanford think about Iran, and that's what we need to do with Ukraine. And I tell you, I have failed to do it so far. I'm still working it, and you need to help us. Story number 2. And then 3, we have to get our foundations and Title VI money, the more institutional funding of education, they have to change the way they think about Ukraine. I would say the same about a lot of other countries, but we're talking about Ukraine today. If it's just always part of a first word with a comma and then something else, it will never change fundamentally. Those big foundations that fund a lot of research, they have to change the structure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Ambassador McFall. I think you just answered brilliantly the question that the first panel was supposed to answer. Namely, why do we need Ukrainian studies more than ever before? Thank you very much for doing that. Dr. Polyukhovich, we already provided a lot of policy recommendations to what American government and what American universities should do. Let me reverse the discussion a little bit and ask you to tell us what Ukrainian universities are doing these days, despite all hardships, tragedies, and resilience, and horrific attacks, how you see Ukraine's future in the next 10, 20 years to come, how you modify your programs today to ensure that your university, and you represent one of the best in Ukraine, Kyiv Mohyla Academy, are capable to educate the next generation of Ukrainian leaders who would be responsible for bringing their country to the next level.
Thank you so much, Katerina, for your question. You can hear me, right? Okay. And it's a great privilege and honor to be here, and thank you for your kind invitation. Despite the full-scale invasion, we are proceeding at our university as if everything is normal. So graduation ceremonies are taking place, and during the full-scale invasion, we opened and reorganized two faculties. So this is the faculty of continuing and professional learning, and the faculty of psychology, social work, and public health. New MA, BA programs are being opened at our university. And of course, everything is possible due to those people who defend us in the front lines, and thanks to whom I and my colleagues have a place to come back home. And our community never stood aside social and political processes, so including Orange Revolution, Revolution of Dignity, and now the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So we have many of our colleagues who are now in the armed forces of Ukraine, and what amazes me, some of them are continuing to work at university, holding classes and serve as the administrators. Tragically, we won't see any more 24 of our colleagues whose photo are situated on the wall memorial at our main building. They were killed by Russia, and I recognize at least 3 faces, and one of them is my student, Mykola Rachok, who was writing his MA thesis about cars in American literature of 1920s, 1930s. Probably he could write more on this and research, but he would not. And also, what was mentioned here, it's about the future, the part of future that we are losing already. Exhibition Unissued Diplomas. It's an exhibition about Ukrainian students that also were killed by Russia as civilians or as military. And technically, these students could have any diploma of the world, but they won't. In such circumstances, we continue to work, and when I was thinking about your, Katerina, questions and the topic of our conference, in May alone, our president, Serhiy Kvit, signed an agreement of cooperation with University of California, Berkeley, and there will be an innovative hub opened, and Kyiv Mohyla Academy is actively participating in those activities. And historically, Kyiv-Mohyla Academy scholars were very active in international events, and in the same month, in May, 8 our scholars participated at the annual convention of the Association for Nationality Studies at Columbia University, and the majority of their topics were directly or indirectly connected to the full-scale invasion. And it's very important that Ukrainian voices could be heard at such international events of such scale. Also, speaking about research, we are continuing doing very serious research. It is connected mainly to psychological treatment because of reasons evident. And we are doing this research in cooperation with Boston Medical School, Harvard Medical School, and the support is provided by the National Institute of Health. And I must say it here that we are the only one university in Ukraine that are doing grants supported by the National Institute of Health. It's very complicated grants, and we are really working very hard on them. Also, we are in Ukraine, we try to expand our knowledge derived from a research to the whole Ukraine. And we are the leaders here in training. This is the methodology. Its abbreviation is CETA. This methodology in psychological treatment was developed in the US after 9/11 tragedy, and Ukraine subsequently became involved in this research. And what we are doing at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, we are providing certificate programs for other trainees from Ukraine, and thus expanding this knowledge. Also, what is worth mentioning, it's veterans topic, and we will launch certificate programs for our veterans, and it was possible with the generous support of Kyiv-Mohyla Foundation of America, who are our great friends and partners during the decades. Also, what is worth mentioning, we have MA and BA programs in communications in state governance in a collaboration with Indiana University. And also, we have also many grassroots initiatives. And our faculty of law is very active in this process. They launched a peer-to-peer legal writing seminar for BA students, and our students have a possibility to cooperate with the US students from the law schools of Yale, Harvard, Columbia, Northwestern University, among others. And it's a great sign of support and solidarity for us, and we definitely want to develop and expand this experience. Also, in terms of promotion, we have a project, ChemA Talks, academic talks. This is a series of webinars which are concentrated on the legal issues of ongoing war, and it is done with the support of Ukrainian World Congress. It is open for everyone. I kindly invite you to participate, to ask questions, and the US audience is one of the largest in these webinars. Okay, so I can proceed, but yeah, as there is a lack of time, we are happy to continue, and these initiatives should be strengthened and expanded. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. You mentioned several lines of very important work, like documentation of Russia's war crimes in Ukraine and preparation of the new generation of Ukrainian legal scholars who would be capable of doing this and bringing Russia to justice and accountability for its war crimes. Re-education of Ukraine's war veterans. We will have thousands and thousands of Ukrainians who will be eventually brought to civilian life afterwards. So this is a very big line of work for Ukraine's educators in the future. And you also mentioned the third, which I believe one of the biggest issues right now in Ukraine is mental health, and I know that First Lady Olena Zelenska is also a big patron of initiatives in this field. By the way, she started her visit to the United States this time from the visit to Walter Reed Medical Health Center, particularly focusing on their mental health initiatives. I am very pleased that our dear representatives of the Ukrainian governmental and semi-governmental institutions are present here, Volodymyr Shaiko and Yevgen Kudryavets. Volodymyr, let us begin with you. You brought, the Ukrainian Institute brought several wonderful cultural projects here to Washington, D.C. Deputy Minister Borovets mentioned the postcards from Ukraine exhibit, the books. I know that you recently also launched a very important program, the Lysak-Rudnitsky Ukrainian Studies program. Please tell us more how you try to influence the thinking of your colleagues in the West and globally, and how you try to change the narrative of presenting Ukraine and talking about Ukraine, particularly in the field of culture and arts.
Thank you, Katerina. Hello, everybody, and of course, my fellow panelists. It's a privilege to be here and to speak to such a distinguished audience, and I'm really happy that the topic of Ukrainian studies gets elevated so highly with the presence of our First Lady, Olena Zelenska, and representatives of the US and Ukrainian governments in parallel to the NATO summit that is taking place here in DC. Now, my perspective on this question that Katerina asked comes from my position as a head of National Cultural Institute and a public organization that does cultural diplomacy on behalf of Ukraine. And the theme and the subject matter of Ukrainian studies, I think, is inseparable from a wider effort that Ukraine has been doing to advance a better understanding and appreciation of Ukraine and its peoples internationally through cultural diplomacy. So we do not separate Ukrainian studies from Ukraine's cultural diplomacy policies, and this is reflected in the Ukrainian Institute's strategy, whereby we are committed to support and to foster a better academic knowledge of Ukraine internationally through our work and through the program that Katerina mentioned, which is named after Ivan Lysak-Rudnitsky, that was also mentioned, who was also mentioned in the video that we watched earlier. I would like to start my remarks as to why Ukrainian studies matters for Ukraine's cultural diplomacy and strategic communications by making a reference to Michel Foucault, a great French philosopher and intellectual, who said, whose thinking was who dedicated a lot of his studies to this interrelation between power and knowledge. He said that knowledge is an exercise of power, and power is a function of knowledge. He went on to say that the exercise of power perpetually creates knowledge, and conversely, knowledge constantly induces effects of power. It is not possible for power to be exercised without knowledge, and it's impossible for knowledge not to engender power. If we were to apply his thinking to our today's circumstances, it's clear that today's policies, government policies, but also bilateral and multilateral relations must be informed by credible academic knowledge that is present, that is available, and it's reliable enough to inform the decisions that are being taken on behalf of all of us. Similarly, it's not possible for knowledge not to engender power, and I think that applies to international academia. If we were to think about the amount of power that is being held in universities that can help Ukraine make a stronger case internationally, then we may speak about universities as true powerhouses that may stand with Ukraine, may want to do stand with Ukraine, but I think they can do so on a much larger scale in the future, to stand with Ukraine and to offer that breadth of knowledge and consequently breadth of power to be made available to decision makers, to academia in other regions of the world, to editors of major outlets and newspapers, to those influencers who hold positions of power in their respective disciplines and backgrounds that are able then to shape perceptions of millions of people with regard to Ukraine, with regard to the whole region of Eastern Europe. And that is, I think, a very underestimated and often overlooked dimension of soft power and of cultural relations today that we must acknowledge and we must act upon. And the audience present here in this room, I think, you together hold an incredible amount of power and an ability to help Ukraine and to show and demonstrate real solidarity with Ukraine by investing more and by paying more attention to Ukrainian studies in your respective institutions. I also want to quote very quickly Alexander Goodman, who was Director of European Affairs for the US National Security Council in 2018-2020, who argued that the problem of Russocentrism in the perception of the region of Eastern Europe in US government circles is even more complex than in academic Slavic studies, which in recent years have at least begun to reevaluate their previous approaches. And he says, in the time I spent on the National Security Council from 2018 to 2020, the results of this cumulative bias in national security education became obvious. Very few officials had specialized knowledge in the region, let alone of Ukraine, and among those, even fewer had Ukrainian language skills. So just one of the quotes to illustrate how far-reaching consequences the underinvestment in Ukrainian studies and regional studies may have globally. Now, when it comes to practical solutions and what has to be or needs to be done to change the situation, I would like to offer a few and propose a few. These recommendations stem from our research, our comprehensive research of Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar studies internationally that we did in 2022. We surveyed over 120 academic centers and think tanks in all regions of the world that had some sort of an element of Ukrainian studies to them. That's from full-fledged institutes to individual scholarships, for example, or learning or teaching programs. So we treated Ukrainian studies field very broadly. And out of those findings that we accumulated, we would like to propose three main areas of project-based work that needs support from our international partners. And we, as an institution, would be very much willing to manage or to administer or to at least be part of that programming moving forward. So three areas which are very crucial for us, from our perspective, to advance Ukrainian studies further. It can be an endowed fund, it can be a dedicated funding program, it can be a multilateral partnerships with major international universities that will enable these three programming areas. First one is development of new courses and curricula and teaching and learning programs at international universities that would do exactly what was mentioned before, to educate American and international audiences about Ukraine, about its past, present, and future aspirations. Second, very important, is a program of research visits of international scholars to Ukraine to be able to work with our archives, primary sources, to network with their Ukrainian peers, that would lead, hopefully, to collaborations and cooperations in the academic field internationally. And last point, support for new research work, individual and collective, support for publications on Ukraine in other languages, and support for translations of these works into other widely used languages around the world. So I would like to leave it at that and invite anyone who would like to have a follow-up conversation to these ideas and proposals. Please, you are most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Volodymyr, especially for your incredible efforts, the efforts of your team to promote the development of Crimean Tatar studies in the world. The point well taken, and I hope that this audience will hear you loud and clear. Our last but not least speaker today and contributor to our discussion is First Deputy Minister of Ukraine for Education and Science, Yevhen Kudryavets, who joined the new administration at the ministry, I believe, about a year ago. Yevhen is not new to Washington, D.C. He was a part of the Ukraine House D.C. Foundation team for about a year, where he developed extensive contacts across the U.S. administration, and who knows very well from inside the challenges and opportunities that U.S.-Ukraine partnership in education and science entail. Yevhen, this is your moment. Please do your elevator pitch and tell us how your ministry is trying to strengthen the partnership that will, again, help Ukraine overcome all the challenges that we've discussed earlier today.
Thank you, Katerina. And first of all, I would like to thank all participants that you have this time with us to discuss Ukrainian studies and the future of that. I want to start with overarching vision and some kind of political and academic vision of the future. And this future based in one word, truth. When we are speaking about the future of Ukrainian studies, first of all, we are speaking about the modality and definition of truth about Ukraine. The truth which prevented the world from believing that Ukraine is a part of Russia when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. The truth that has been attempted to be erased from hundreds of years by different empires of Russians. The truth that was attempted to be deported from Crimea early in the morning of May 18, 1944, along with its people. The truth that is hard to recognize from KGB archives. And in the beginning of last century, Ukrainian immigrants were among the first to offer the world an alternative to Russian Soviet perspective on Ukrainian history, culture, and society in international academic community. This is how the first Ukrainian studies emerged, and the diaspora became the voice of the Ukrainian people who at that time could not speak openly without guidelines from the Soviet Union. British researcher Jade McGlynn, who studied the war, says, any propaganda requires two things, a platform and resonance.
And
resonance.
And resonance.
In places accustomed to a scientific approach, it might seem there is no place for such a platform. However, even now, and with renewed vigor since 2022, the aggressor state is investing significant funds in the development of its propaganda. This is done under the guise of culture, education, and research, and is authorized by decrees personally signed by Putin. But the truth and history lie in other decrees. In those that 2 days ago targeted Kiev's largest and most technologically advanced children's hospital, where the most severe diseases are treated with a Russian missile. According to military analysts, the hospital was hit by a modernized version of the Russian missile with a special approach when you need to upload the image of the building before the hit. And this is a current reality, our modern history. The Ukrainian people are strong, multifaceted, multinational, and have their unique and complex history, a history of indigenous people and all nationalities that are part of our community. The history of Kiev, the history of Ukrainian Carpathians, the indomitable Kharkiv, the Crimean Tatar people who through occupations and deportations, generation after generation, preserve their identity all over the world. The history of Mariupol and Odessa, the histories of millions of people and thousands of cities. In studying Ukraine, it's important to remember the indigenous people and our fight through the years and hundreds of years, last 2 decades, 2 centuries. And it's important in the first panel, it was discussion how Ukraine was misplaced by general understanding of Soviet Union and Russians, and we actually lost a lot of mentioning Ukrainian identity and history in academician reports, in academician scholars, researchers, and now we have time to renew that and to make it possible. The more we talk about study and research real facts about Ukraine, Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian history, Ukrainian place in the history, and contribution to the world history, we will be stronger on all platforms, and we will make the platform of Russian propaganda weaker from time to time and with our common effort. And today, this is a matter of security and life for us. What is discussed in academic circles shapes much more than it seems at first glance. We know how many diplomats and ambassadors and researchers are referring to what scientific community are created, and we need to be on the front line of that academician fight. And now I wanted to present you our new initiative, together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Presidential Foundation for Support of Education, Science and Sports, the Ukrainian Institute and Office of the Crimea Platform, and with the support of the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, we are launching the Global Coalition of Ukrainian Studies and establishing this with aim to unite all existing initiatives and effective contribution to find the common solution how to extend our efforts to spread Ukrainian studies all over the world. And for Ukraine, the support in research and education about Ukrainian studies currently, and culture, and language, and history, and literature is more important now than ever. We invite every university here today to become a participant of that. Together, we are stronger. It means we can have a platform of Ukrainian studies, of Ukrainian leaders all over the world, of Ukrainian scholars who will be on the front line of our propaganda fight against Russian attack and our Russian war against Ukraine. And as of today, Ukrainian Institute has gathered data of 160 centers in 30 countries around the world studying Ukrainian studies. The Presidential Fund and Ministry of Education is currently working with these centers to engage them to be a part of that. And right now on the slide, you can see three main components which will be the part of this initiative, the part of this coalition. First of all, it's interaction and synergy of our efforts. We need to exchange our experience. We need to understand that we are in the same team and we are achieving the same goal together. And it means that we are all here in the hall discussing the future of Ukrainian studies. And in the first panel, it was mentioned that a lot of universities are working, and a lot of universities has different modalities of having Ukrainian studies. And we wanted to have this exchange, we wanted to have this synergy for the future of Ukrainian studies. The second, we wanted to develop the new tools for that. It should be very simple for any university or any institutions to join the coalition. It would not require for you to create the program from the beginning, but you can do some simple stuff to use materials from Ukrainian Institute to launch the exhibition, or you can use the case studies from Presidential Fund to use in your lectures about management or about work or crisis management or global security or global politics. You can use prepared Harvard case studies for your class, but based on Ukrainian story. And it could be all other modalities which we will share with you during the matter of couple of days after the event. All participants will get detailed information how to join coalition and what kind of modalities you can use. And important for us, the joining of that doesn't mean that you are part of some means for you, that you are part of some big goal, which under the auspice of the Ukrainian government and First Lady, and we will work all around the world, starting here from the United States and Canada, and to continue that in all other countries, to say that you need to speak about Ukraine loudly, you need to show Ukraine in the real identity, you need to split Ukrainian history from the general Eastern European studies and show how Ukraine is defining in the current society of Europe, how Ukraine was defining for Europe last 1,000 years. And we aim for universities to gain new opportunities, exchange experience, and receive the best content and support program within the coalition. And I want to conclude my speech with lines about the truth. I started from that, and I wanted to finish with these general thoughts. I wanted to cite Tair Khalilov, a Crimean Tatar deported in childhood. Depriving the motherland, killing the parents, and seizing guardianship of the survived children, what could be more monstrous than this? Every evening in their orphanage assembly, we thank together. For our happy childhood, thank you, our dear homeland. Years later, he would write, the worst thing, my boy, is to be orphaned when they take away your historical memory, when they deprive you of self-awareness. We were forbidden everything except death. We have no right to remain silent about the past or the present, to prevent stories like this and the millions of crimes against humanity happening today in Ukraine. We are all on the side of the truth. We must protect it, and we must be stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I can't think of a better way to conclude this panel with this wonderful quote. Ambassador McFall, Dr. Benbow, General Director Shaiko, Deputy Minister, and Vice Rector and President Polyukhovich, thank you very much for this wonderful panel. Before giving the floor to our concluding remarks, Speaker Dr. Allan Goodman, we have a little surprise ceremony for you. We decided that we cannot close this conference without recognizing a few individuals who are present in this room for the efforts that they've been doing in the last decades to promote Ukrainian studies in the United States and globally. And if I will call your name now, please stand up and join us at the stage where Deputy Minister Iryna Borovets and Deputy Minister Yevgen Kudryavets will present you with the small recognitions for your contributions. Let me invite to the stage Dr. Marta Bohachevska-Khomyak. Former director of the Ukrainian Fulbright office in Kiev. Yulia Ladygina, now associate professor at Penn State University. Dr. Yohanan Petrovsky Stern, professor at Northwestern University. Ambassador Milan Verveer, director of the Women, Peace and Security Institute at Georgetown University. Mr. Bogdan Vitvitsky, president of the Ukrainian Studies Fund in the United States. Mr. Taras Perentsevich, Executive Director of the Ukrainian Studies Fund in the United States. George and Nina Voskov, founders of the Ukrainian Studies programs at Penn State University. Dr. Henry Hale, if he is still here with us in the room. No.
Dr. Valentina Izmirlieva from Columbia University. Dr. Natalia Hanenko-Friesen, Director of the Canadian Ukrainian Institute at the University of Alberta. Dr. Tymisz Holowinsky, Executive Director of the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University. I don't know if you are still in the audience, so let me read the names. Dr. Sophia Wilson. Dr. Alexandra Vallo. Dr. Yulia Ilchuk from Stanford. Dr. Svetlana Rohovik. No? Oh, yes, here she is. Ambassador Michael McFall. And Dr. Sophia Wilson. Oh, you already got it. Yeah, great. I can't conclude by not mentioning Dr. Serhiy Plokhy, who was supposed to be here today, unfortunately couldn't join us for health reasons, but of course Dr. Serhiy Plokhy more than anyone else deserves the recognition that will be given to him later. And now Dr. Allan Goodman, CEO of the Institute of International Education, which oversees academic exchange on the Fulbright program, formerly Executive Dean and Professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, author of numerous books published by the most prestigious publishing houses in the United States, who holds a doctorate from Harvard University, MPA from the Kennedy School of Government, and BS from Northwestern University, will conclude our conference with some closing remarks. Dr. Goodman, thank you very much.
And we're very proud of Katerina. We first met as she was a returned Fulbright alumna working in Kyiv. I think maybe Mary Kirk would have known her during her time on Fulbright, but thank you for inviting me. I love graduations. I also think I took the first semester of a course in contemporary Ukrainian studies. At least I had the feeling that the two panels and all of the speeches gave me an understanding of Ukraine that I really never had before. I have the toughest job in the world, which is to conclude. I'm going to do it in 4 words and make 2 observations. We're all Ukrainians. It was the message I sent the day of the invasion to our office, the Fulbright office in Kyiv. It's a message I unfortunately send after every bombing, like the one earlier this week of the Children's Hospital, because I want us all to realize that what Ukraine is fighting for is part of us. Liberty, independence, freedom are things we fought for, we value, and the outcome of your struggle very much affects how we can live in a world where those are valued. It's ironic that 60 years almost to the date of today, 35,000 Americans walked from the White House to DuPont Circle for the unveiling of the Shevchenko Memorial. On that day, we were all Ukrainians. And I want to assure you that when I drive home from the office and pass the memorial, there isn't a moment that I don't think about what's happening and the roles we all need to play in making the outcome better. Two observations. One, drawn from our work with the Scholar Rescue Fund. It will come as no surprise that tyrants, terrorists, and their wars are targeting schools and especially institutes and institutions of higher education with alarming and increasing frequency. We've been doing this scholar rescue work for 105 years at the Institute. The past 4 years have been the absolute busiest years in our history, worse than the Nazis, worse than the Soviets, worse than many civil wars, in terms of the global scope and attacks of institutions of higher education. That's probably not news to the professors sitting in the audience. It always shocks American audiences when I speak about this because they think of the Nazi and Soviet period as something of the past. And then when you read to them the headlines of today, every country that's under attack in some way, one of the first targets are the scholars and the universities. When that happens, universities close. They close their doors. People flee. The terrorists and the tyrants close entire departments, entire disciplines, ultimately entire universities. The second point I want to make is that Ukraine is different. In all of our work, especially in the past decade, where we've seen governments and universities under attack and close, Ukraine is the exception. The moment you were attacked, you reached out to your American and European partners and partnerships. When the instinct would be to close and cease operations, you found ways, first with the universities in the East to reconstitute them in the West. And then as universities and schools were destroyed, you found ways to still teach, to still have students, and to survive two invasions, one COVID and one Russian. I haven't seen anything like that in the world of scholar rescue. I haven't seen any president who's leading a country under attack say one of my priorities is opening our doors. One of the presidential priorities is strengthening education and science. And one of the priorities is making robust and new partnerships so that we can learn from each other. Ukraine is the exception. And like the Shevchenko Memorial, I'll never forget that what your government and country is doing today in higher education through the partnerships that were represented here. I'll never forget that you are the exception, which I hope will, like the memorial, shine for a very long time in keeping academic doors open, strengthening partnerships, and making the world we share a less dangerous place. Thank you so much for being Ukrainian and having me.
Dear friends, you know that conferences draw a lot of guests, especially if you have a First Lady in the audience. But I want to thank all those who stayed with us till the very last moment of this wonderful event today. This conference was organized because of you, because you're here, because the subject that we discussed today deeply matters to you. Thank you very much for your participation on behalf of the Embassy of Ukraine to the United States, Ambassador Oksana Markarova, who unfortunately couldn't join us because we have the NATO summit going on the margins of our conference. Let me thank you all for joining us today. I hope that we will see each other again in the future because we're just launching something big and beautiful. I hope that the new initiative, Global Ukrainian Studies, will flourish. And let me assure you that we, as representatives of Ukraine's government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Ministry of Education and Science, will do our best to ensure that this endeavor will fly high and bright. Thank you.